welcome to another episode of Open World Chat. We've got Jim Dandino here of Den of Cool, and I'm John Odom of Really Just My Couch. Say hi, Jim.
Den of Geek? Did you conflate our two respective outlets?
No, I conflated the order in which I introduced us. I said you were Den of Geek, and then I said I was my couch.
No, you said Den of Cool.
Oh, I did? All right, well, let me
drunk?
just restart that. That's really stupid. All right.
It's fine.
Oh, my God. No, I'm going to leave that.
Fuck it, we'll do it live,
an
right?
idiot. Yeah, exactly. All right. Anyway, our guest today is so much more interesting than where Jim and I work or have worked. We've got creator John Ostrander, actually creator. I think it's fair to call you a comics legend, right? You've reached legendary status for sure.
At least in my own mind, yeah.
Well, so we'll do a trip into the legendary status here of John Ostrander's mind. John, you've been one of my favorite writers for God, forever. So first off, let me just thank you for all the joy you've brought me and for taking up so much of my time that I would have otherwise used for useless, worthless things, I'm sure.
And your money.
Right. The money I definitely would have spent on more useless, worthless things. So I thank you for that very much. So,
yeah, John, for like 4 consecutive Comixology sales, the only thing that I bought were your Suicide Squad trades. So I know we're going to get all the Suicide Squad stuff out of the way and talk about the deeper cuts later, but we are going to start by telling you that your Suicide Squad is legendary, qualifies you as legendary. It is some of the best comics out there, and seeing it get a pop culture reappraisal in recent years has been really, really fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's turned out to be one of my favorite books, obviously, to be doing. Although, and I will say this, we might as well talk a little bit about the opening, and I have told some of this story elsewhere before, so if you've all heard it, well, you're going to hear it again. So, but I was trying to get some work outside. I was working at First Comics. I was trying to get more work elsewhere because I wanted to spread out a little bit. And Bob Greenberger and I had met in several different conventions and had struck up a relationship. And so he wanted me to work at DC as well. I was not at all adverse. He asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I want to do Challengers of the Unknown because it's one of the great titles of all time in comics. I mean, Challengers of the Unknown. Oh, man, that's a great title. But I was told, no, somebody else has got dibs on that. And I said, oh, all right. And so Bob said, but we got this other title. It only appeared in 5 issues of an anthology title back around, I guess, the early 60s. He said, it's called Suicide Squad. And I said, what a dumb name. Who in their right minds would belong to a group that calls itself Suicide Squad? So I went off and thought about it. And I went, well, wait a minute. Maybe they don't have a choice. All right, who wouldn't have a choice? And I went, ooh, prisoners. Criminal prisoners. I said, oh, now this gets interesting. Dirty Dozen. I take them, put them on a mission for the United States in the United States interests, and if they survive, well, they get out of prison or get time off from their prison, and all that. And and I'd also always been a big fan of the villain books that sometimes showed up, like the Joker had his own title for a while, and there was one called Secret Society of Supervillains, which I really liked. Had just lots of villains, and they never succeeded because they couldn't get along with one another. So, so I suggested that we do a kind of cross between Dirty Dozen and Mission Impossible, and they went for it. So I created Amanda Waller then for it, and my good friend Mike Gold, who had been at Verse and brought me into comics in the first place, had gone over to DC at that point. And one of his assignments was to do the first crossover after Crisis on Infinite Earths. So he wanted me to plot, to come in and plot it. And he says, and we'll introduce the Suicide Squad here because it's going to reach a lot of people. I said, oh, okay, that sounds intelligent. So we went ahead and did it anyway. And so it first showed up there, but I knew who I wanted. You had to have somebody in charge of the team. And for that, I created Amanda Waller. And I knew that I wanted, first of all, I wanted her to be Black because there were very few leading Black characters at that point in comics. And I also wanted her to be of a certain age and a certain heft. To me, like her size would be, since she didn't have any powers, that would indicate some of her strength, some of her power. The fact that visually, she's not a model. She doesn't look like the other one. So I wanted something that would be unusual. And then we got John Byrne. I think it was his first thing over at DC after he left Marvel to draw Legends, and he designed Amanda Waller based upon some of my requests. And then from there, we went into the Secret Origins, which came out, I think, 2 weeks after the final issue of Legends. And then 2 weeks after that, the first issue of Suicide Squad came up. And we had decided who was going to be in the squad. And also Bob was insistent that we also have a couple of heroes in there to sort of ride herd on them. So it became a large team on it, and we were off to the races.
It's funny how Suicide Squad really filled a hole in the comics out there, the stories that were being told that you didn't know was there until Suicide Squad shows up. And you're like, wow, we have needed this, something like this for a long time. And then you filled that hole for us. So everybody should be grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, there's some question, it's like, well, supervillain books don't sell. No, we'll make this one sell. I know how to do it. And I'm also always interested in what I call narrative alloys, where you take something from here and something from there and then smush them together. And so since I like doing supervillains, I like spy stories a lot and stuff. So I smushed them together, and we started doing. The other nice thing about the squad is that because they were villains, the U.S. could disavow them at any time. Just throw them under the bus. And we also added the thing. Like, well, how do they keep them in line? Well, we added. At first, it was the bomb in the arm, although eventually it moved up to their necks, and which brings to mind something from the first Suicide Squad movie, was when Captain Boomerang is talking to Slipknot, and he's telling him, well, this is all just garbage, it's all fake, and convinces him to go off and push the limits on it. And he gets his arm blown off. In the movie, his head blown off. And when they started doing that in the movie, I almost was laughing to myself because I went, oh, great. That's right out of the book. I mean, almost word for word out of the book. And I enjoyed that so much. So
one of the things that made it really entertaining for me was how it filled out the political space in the DC universe. It wasn't, my knowledge of pre-crisis DC is not encyclopedic, but I definitely got the sense that the way that these nations interacted with each other on a political scale was not something that had been fully fleshed out before. And to be honest, it's not something that's really ever effectively fleshed out on a regular basis, even past that. Was that something you went in with intention to do?
Oh yeah. I mean, let's take a look here. Crisis on Infinite Earths was an announcement that DC was changing everything. Everything was up for grabs. Like you had a crossover on the scale that had not been done before. They killed important characters off, even if some of them came back later. And it made it a more serious book. I mean, before that, DC was basically kid stuff. Batman was the comic was largely influenced for a while by the TV show, and it became camp and silly. Well, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, when they got a hold of it, they decided, well, no, we're going to make it serious. We're going to make it brooding. And so the chance to do more serious work, to say, hi, this is not just for kids. This is, it's understanding where's your audience now. It's not largely in the 10-year-olds by that point. It's largely, with young adults at that point. And you want to attract them with, slightly more sophisticated material. And I wanted it to reflect the world that we lived in a bit, because by doing that, then it means something to the reader, I think. So that was the intention, and that's where we went.
It did. It definitely meant something. But I don't want to waste all of our time talking about how great Suicide Squad was, because I'm sure you've had plenty of time talking about it. But what's it like seeing your work translated to the big screen like that? And is there any way to have the creator rights discussion without getting you into trouble?
No, we can probably talk about it. Right. I will say that, and I'm very grateful to, who was the head of DC at that point?
Paul Levitz.
Paul Levitz. Yeah, Paul made sure that I had a participation contract regarding Amanda. And Amanda's made me a nice pile of change over the years, and I'm very grateful to her. Every time I see her appearing somewhere else, I go, oh, there's a royalty check coming down the line. So, no, DC overall has been good. I've gotten good royalties on the resale of the Suicide Squad trade paperbacks and stuff like that. So I'm grateful for that. But, I signed the contract at the time. Now, I will say that the contracts were very sort of take it or leave it. And for a long time, the checks that you got, where you went to endorse it on the back, was another statement of you giving up your rights. Well, I didn't think that was very nice or fair, because, if you wanted the money, you had to sign it away. And
right.
That's not a negotiation. That's a gun at your head. So they're not entirely, sweetness and light about it. But yes, I do believe that creators should have more rights. And yeah, just because you sign a piece of paper back then doesn't mean that it's right.
Right.
Well, you've seen the issue from so many more angles, I think, probably than most creators. You've got, all this property showing up in films, television, Amanda Waller. You also managed to get back the complete rights. Is that correct? For Grimjack from First, after the long lamented First comics? And
what happened is that eventually, for a long time, the remains of First was hanging on to the rights to Grimjack, even though I thought that the contract stated that if they didn't publish it for a while, all rights reserved to me. So every time, the only negotiating ploy I had for a while was to say no and walk away. Sometimes that's all you can do is walk away. It's like, okay, I'm not going to get what I want. You're not going to get any use out of it. Eventually what happened was the remains of First, and Tim and I, and we added Mike Gold into it as well, since he was the first editor at First for Grimjack. We all pooled our rights into a central holding company that was created. And so, yeah, I have now deep rights into it. I have some control on it, but where it's going, they want to get my agreement, my permission on things. On the other hand, I like to see something happen with it. So I'm not going to necessarily say no to everything that's offered. since now I'm included in on that. So yeah, I've got financial rights and ownership now in Grimjack, probably more so than virtually any other book or property that I've worked on.
Well, can you tell us anything about, the Russo brothers, mentioning that this is something they'd like to take on? Has that moved anywhere, or is that just
right now? It's just dead in the water. There was a movement towards making a movie. The Russo brothers were very keen on it, which is very exciting because they announced that right after Endgame came out. So, talk about a pair of people who have cojones, like in the movie business, that's them. But it was hard to convince the studios. They looked at what would be the likely costs of putting up Grimjack. I personally think that they've done more risky things, but it was hard to convince them to take it on. So it hasn't been picked up anywhere. Will it at some point? Well, I hope so. God knows. I would love to see it.
Actually, in a lot of ways, it seems ideal for a lot of the streaming services. The property is complex enough, and the characters are numerous and rich enough. I almost feel like a movie would not do it justice. As you've probably noticed, what Suicide Squad was to Jim, Grimjack is to me. Grimjack is my favorite comic ever, my favorite character ever. I adore that book. Mm-hmm. So yet another reason to be grateful to you. But it does seem to be, I think, extraordinarily well suited for a streaming service. I hope they figure that out.
Well, what's interesting these days is, when I first created that, went, there's no chance it's, Sinister, all the stuff that goes on. I thought, it could cost too much visually. It would still be expensive. But these days, you can do it. The CSI, the level of technology is up there to the point to where, they can do it. They can get it out. They can make it look like it's happening for real. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, there's a lot of levels to it. And certainly, Grimjack in many ways is the cornerstone of my career. It wasn't the first thing I did in comics, but it was very early in my career. And originally, he was going to be in prose. I was going to do short stories, maybe novels with him. And I actually did one short story. I don't know where it is now. And I doubt if I'll ever let it see the light of day. But I knew First was looking for more properties. And so I said, well, okay, I'll take Grimjack. They have Sinister. I'll combine those two together and pitch it to them. And at the time, they said, we like it a lot, but man, this is an older character. He's a very dark character, very grim, very gritty. And grim and gritty was not the phrase that was used at the time. Some people say it was coined particularly with regards to Grimjack. But and Grimjack also was another one of those narrative alloys that I like to put together because I love Sword and Sorcery, Conan, King Kull, the others. And I loved hard-boiled detectives as well, So I smooshed them together. And we got the hard-boiled barbarian there in Grimjack. And that was really the start of that. But one of the interesting things to me, because you talked about the characterization on it, and I remember at the time we were getting letters. We had a large female following in Grimjack, and that surprised me because he was violent. He was a big, ugly guy with a gun, and who was a very violent character. And I asked some women, well, what attracts you to this book? I can see guys being attracted to it, but why are women? And they said, because there are characters and the characters change. And they like that. And it's about relationships. And they like that. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I like to do as well. I do it so I don't get bored, in it. But yeah, that was a lot of the roots for both the start and how I continued.
Yeah, I bet not to generalize too much, but I can imagine the story of Spook being very strong cross-gender appeal.
Yeah. Although there was one point, particularly where we killed off Spook, which is hard to do because she's a ghost, but and that was one of the most difficult issues to write, because usually when I write Grimjack, both he and Amanda Waller are the ones who I just shut up and listen to them. And they, the dialogue comes right out, from the ether, from wherever, and I just transcribe it. Gaunt didn't care for that story at all. He wouldn't speak to me at all. I had to pull everything out. It's one of the cases where if you're smart, you listen to your characters and go where they want to go, even if it's not where you were intending to go.
That's interesting. Well, that story left a mark. I tell you that. Ugh, that was brutal. That was brutal, man. Can't believe you did that to me.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times, I've done stuff. Just jumping over to Spectre for a second. We had the character Amy, who we told almost for the first issue. We were telling the readers, she's going to die. No, she is going to die. And then when we killed her off in like the 11th or 12th issue, people were going, how could you do that? And it's like, we told you we were going there, and we went there.
Speaking of the Spectre, it makes me think how you have had some room, and in Grimjack too, to really, I don't know, expound a little bit on the afterlife.
Yeah.
And you've taken it in very thoughtful ways when it could, honestly, you could have done a hack job, but it's clearly something that you think about that is meaningful. And what was it like to have room to stretch your legs like that? That's I think that kind of philosophical space is not something that everybody gets in this medium.
Oh yeah, I was very grateful that DC gave me the room to do that. Tom Mandrake, who also was on Grimjack for a while, and then he came over and we were doing Firestorm together. Tom's a great friend of mine, great friend. And in fact, at one point, I and Kim Yale moved to New Jersey to be closer to him and Jan Dursman, his wife, who was also one of my partners in crime. And when we were finishing up Firestorm, they asked, well, what do you want to do next? And we said, well, give us the Spectre. And they said, we just did the Spectre a little while ago. It never lasts. Like either you got to downgrade his powers or the story's going to only last. And we said, no, we know what we're doing. Give us the character. And so they finally did. And then they gave us room to strut with it. And there too, we got into theological, philosophical things. Every series has its own theme. And it seemed to me tied to the very nature of the Spectre to go into those ideas. So doing that was just, to me, part and parcel of what the book was about. For us, we didn't reduce the Spectre's power because we said, when you go to the Spectre, there's certain visuals, a certain iconography that you are expecting to see, and that has to be there. Also, it gives Tom more fun to do. So our focus was not so much on the Spectre as it was on his alter ego, Jim Corrigan. And we explored that because the idea was Corrigan was a hard-boiled, plainclothes detective in the 30s when he died. For us, we said, okay, he's been dead since the 30s. Forget all the other stuff you've read about him. He's been dead since the 30s. And he's still that kind of figure. He's still that kind of guy. And a lot of what the Spectre was came out of how Corrigan did things, of how Corrigan saw the world. And so we explored it that way. And what I'm really grateful for is towards the end of the run, at one point, Dan Rassler, who's editor, said, you got, sales are going down. We're probably going to cancel it in about a year. And so we said, great, we'll use this time to wind it up. And what I'm very grateful to DC for was Tom and I had a pretty good idea from almost the start of how we wanted to end it. And we told DC, and they said, okay. And so we took the story up to Corrigan giving up the Spectre and going on to his own afterlife. And that, to me, brought all of the issues, made it all one story. And it's a story of one man from where he started and how he grew and changed. And so he was able to let go of what the Spectre was at the end.
That was a hell of a run.
Did getting out of the way characters make it easier to do stuff like that? Like you're telling, the villains on the Suicide Squad were D-list. Grimjack was your own character.
Yeah.
The Spectre was not a top tier character. No. Even Martian Manhunter, when he's on the Justice League at the premier super team, the mega super team of the DC universe, he's still like the 6th or 7th guy on that team, right? Does having out of the way heroes enable you to tell a better story?
Absolutely. I sought them out, constantly, because I wanted characters that I could get a hold of and that could be mine, and I could take them where I wanted to, in ways that you couldn't with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, some of the others. It's like, no. Give me some of the more minor characters and let me do things with them. I mean, that certainly was true in Suicide Squad all the time. One of the most popular characters on the squad was Deadshot. I picked Deadshot out of Who's Who, and he only had a half page. Didn't even read a full page, but they showed his costume. I thought his costume was cool. Gave a little bit of information about him. I said, "Oh, I want him," and I knew they would let me do whatever I wanted to with him. And for me, it was never that he had a death wish. It's that he didn't care. I once saw a interview on TV with a guy who was a for-hire killer for the mob, and God, had the deadest eyes of anyone I've ever seen. And his basic attitude was, "I don't care if I die, so why should I care if you die?" And I could take that and use that with Deadshot. He didn't care if he died. If he didn't care about his life, he's not going to care about your life. So we could take things like that and then extend it. And Deadshot became, along with Boomerang, one of the most popular characters in the squad.
I love that you pulled him out of Who's Who. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Who's Who was a Bible for me. I went through and looked up different characters. We used Punch and Julie. We used that was my source book a lot of the time. It's like, okay, who's there? Who's not really being used? Now, I will say about James Gunn, and the most recent one, is he did something that I wouldn't even have considered at the time, which was Polka Dot Man. Because Polka Dot Man was just too silly as far as I was concerned. I didn't feel I could do anything with him. And he made him a great character in the movie.
Yeah. So it sounds like you walked into a lot of jobs saying, "I know what I'm doing, let me do my thing." Yeah. Did you ever walk into a job where you said, "I know what I'm doing, let me do my thing," and you walked out of that job shortly thereafter saying, "Oh my God, I was so wrong"?
I was offered Lady Death, and I took it on, and I shouldn't have. I didn't have a deep sympathy for the character. I was just looking for work, and I don't think I really got her. I'm not blaming the character. I'm not blaming its creator. I'm not blaming that company. I'm just saying I think they picked me because of my work on the Spectre, and they wanted to see me expand it a little bit more. But I don't think I did that character a service. I didn't walk out immediately, but it's not my best work.
Okay.
So one thing I want to ask you about, and you're killing me all this because I want to see it, is what's up with Hexer Dusk?
Ooh.
When do I get to see this?
Well, the first one's out, you know.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh my God, what's wrong with me? All right, never mind. I'll go find it.
Yeah,
see, something else I have to cut out where I sound like an idiot. Oh my God.
No. I don't think everyone has gotten their copy of it yet, because you know when you're doing that kind of job where the creators become the publishers as well, and there's a lot of work involved with it. And so once the story is created, and also Jan had a bunch of sketches that was part of the bonus material, so she's had to do that as well. And no one is putting it in the mail except her. I'm now in Michigan. She's in Jersey. If I was in Jersey, I could help, but I'm not. So it takes a while to get all that stuff out the door. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people who have been doing stuff like that have found that to be true. You know, yes, book publishers do have a definite function that the artist, both the writer and the artist, never get their hands into. And when it has to, it's like, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. So it is out there for those of you who haven't got your copies. I think there's only a few left of that, but it's out there. Jan and I have worked on a second volume for that. So I've sort of petered out on it right now, but I hope to get back to it at some point.
All right. Well, I'm going to find it then, by God.
Yeah.
You're giving me a mission for the weekend.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's a good book. And some of Jan's best work. It was Jan's creation, essentially. You know, it came to her in a dream. And then she's Hexer Dusk's mama in every real sense of that word, you know. I will say that now, generally when I'm working with people, I like to get their input from other members of the team. I give the analogy to like being in a band. Everyone has got their instrument to play and their contribution to make. So, and in this case, in terms of working with Jan, including in the Star Wars stuff, the stuff always came out best when Jan had a clear chance to contribute in terms of character, plot, theme, you know. So, and she's taken that and run with it, and she does. And as a result, her artwork is some of the best artwork of her career, both that and Hexer Dusk. And she's an incredible artist, an incredible mind. I will say, just to give an example of one of Jan's strengths, when we were doing Star Wars, when we first came up with the character of Quinlan Voss, who was a Jedi, and he is actually in Phantom Menace. He's sitting at a back table in a cantina scene where basically Jar Jar gets in trouble, but he's in the background, and he's only on screen for like fractions of a second. Jan saw him there, said, okay, that's our character, based the character on that. She could watch a hummingbird's wings flap. You know, her eyes are that good, you know. And so she saw one that she wanted and made that into Quinlan Voss.
What's the gig you always chase?
Sorry?
You've done so much you've written so many different characters for so many different companies, and contributed so much to the canon of like the various universes. Even Star Wars, you've contributed so much that they can't keep your stuff out after a full reboot. But like, what's the gig that you always chased? Who have you not written yet that you desperately want to?
Well, Challengers of the Unknown remains a big one. I've done some Batman, like to do more. Dr. Fate at DC, I think would be made to order for me and Mandrake.
I can see that. Right.
Even more than Batman, though, in my later years, I've come to say, I'd like to do Superman. I think it'd be a very different character than anything I've ever done. And I don't know how much freedom I would get. You know, and of course, it runs opposite to my whole thing of take the D-list character so you can do anything you want. Well, I wouldn't be able to do anything I wanted, but maybe I could convince them to do some of the things that I wanted. But there is something about Superman that now attracts me a whole lot.
What is it?
It's that it's not his powers that make him Superman. It's his heart. And I don't think, if you know good people, it's not just that they naturally turn to it. Like they just automatically do the right thing. No, a lot of the time it takes something out of them. It costs them to do something like that, to do the right thing. And I'd like to explore that with Superman. I'd like to see, what it has cost him in order to what could he do if he just chose to, if, for instance, as Clark Kent, let's say, and as a reporter, and he's in the Ukraine, and he sees all the dreadful things that are going on. At what point does he get fed up and say, no more, and takes out the Russian army, and maybe Putin as well? At what point would he ever cross that line? He's got to ask himself with with climate change and all the things that people are doing to abuse the earth, and the fact that it can kill the earth, it could kill everyone on the earth. Well, if he's a hero, is he ever going to say something? Is he ever going to do something? And if he does he step over the line? What does it cost him? And to me, that's an interesting question. If I have an interesting question, then I can write things better, I think.
So, you were talking about, what a talent Jan is, and, Tom Mandrake. You've ended up working with Tim Truman a few times, and Hawk World, by the way, I think is a fantastic book, and Hawkman, your Hawkman. So this is a small group of folks you've really gelled with. Who else would you add to that list?
Oh, geez. There's some of the Spanish artists that I've worked with that I enjoyed working with. I never know until I've worked sometimes with them. There's so many wonderfully talented people. And one of the things that I try to do when I'm on a book and say maybe working with someone that I haven't worked with before, is to see where are their strengths, where do I think that their strengths are, what do they really like to do, and how can I work the stories around so they get really what they like to do more and more. So there's just so many people who are out there, both writers and artists. I've done some co-writing with Gail Simone. She's wonderful. She's a wonderful, wonderful writer. I like working with her a lot. There's people who have been friends who I've never worked with. Bill Reinhold is among those. I've done, I think, a little bit of work with Joe Staten, but I love Joe's stuff. And Oh, geez, I'd have to flip my mental Rolodex, and so fast, cards are going to start flying out of it.
Well,
Jim,
no,
you had something.
No,
no, go ahead. I'm monopolizing here. What do you?
You're allowed to monopolize. I monopolize sometimes too. You're allowed to geek out over Hawkworld. We're allowed to like. It's not just us complaining about how shitty the MCU is. We're allowed to like things on this podcast too.
Though, actually, tell us about your Marvel stuff, because they don't really generally think of you as a Marvel guy.
Yeah. One of my favorite books that I worked on there was Heroes for Hire. I came in on that because Roger Stern, who was going to be the writer on it, dropped out of it for his own reasons. And so I came in, took over, and interesting bunch of characters. Again, not necessarily A-list characters, but I got to do things with them and bring characters in, drop characters out. And we sort of worked up to a thing where I don't know why I was doing this, but I would take each issue up to a cutoff point, a cliffhanger. And then the next issue we'd start up, and then we'd finish up that cliffhanger, but then start on the next story in the second half of the book. So that to me was an interesting way of going about things. And we had a narrator. This was fun for me. I don't know whether anybody else got it, but the narrator got increasingly involved and a little bit hysterical until finally She-Hulk fired him. So I enjoyed that a lot. It just, how far can you push it? Mm-hmm. Also, I enjoyed doing, because I had just finished doing the Kents, my Western over at DC, about Superman's forebearers. I was talking with some people over at Marvel, and the question became, okay, having done a Western at DC, can I now get away with doing a Western at Marvel? And they let me do that. I actually did two of them. Blaze of Glory, which is the last ride of the Marvel Western heroes. And then we did one with, I think it was I forget what, Rawhide Kid, called Patchy Skies. And that was cool too, and had a great artist on it. And we just got to do very, very strange stuff. Again, if you play in the outriders, the places that people don't usually go, you can do a lot of stuff and have a lot of fun there. So I do remember at one point I was also doing X-Men, not X-Men, but X-Men.
Oh yeah.
And that I eventually left because it was going to be very difficult. I had to run my plots not only through my editor, but through the X-Men office, and it was getting harder to do because they would reject and say, "Well, no, John, you can't do that because it's too close to what we're doing in X-Men." And I said, "Well, okay, can you tell me what you're doing so I don't have to keep redoing this over and over again?" They said, "No, you don't have a high enough security clearance." So I said, "All right, I'm going to go do something else."
You weren't in the X-Men office when you were working on X-Men?
No, I wasn't in the actual X-Men office. I knew them, but what was going on with the X-Men books, I was not allowed to know. They were very secretive about what was supposed to be happening.
The dysfunction of the 90s X-Men office is legendary anyway, so
hey, they put out some great books, and they had to cope a lot with a fan base that was desperate to find out what was going to happen next.
Yes.
And just waiting for what the book was going to show them. So they got very secretive, very controlling.
I mean, that era of X-Men was my way into comics. So
yeah,
it's always been a point of fascination for me, just how screwed up some of the behind the scenes stuff was, and how ravenous and furious the fan base was.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I actually, I'm glad that I was just on the outlier of that. So another book that we haven't talked about yet that I'm very fond of, but this is back at DC, was Wasteland. That was our horror series, our horror anthology. Mike Gold came up to me and said that he wanted to do it, but he wanted to do it from a comedy horror, and he wanted to make it very different than any comic book horror book, because those tended to be turn on plot twists and stuff like that at the end. He wanted us to be more psychological. Mike once described it, Wasteland, as being black hole humor. It was so dark that sometimes laughs couldn't escape from it. So, I did it with a lot of it with Del Close, who was the legendary guru, teacher, director at Second City, and who taught so many of what we regard as the major comedy actors coming up. John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, so many of them coming out of Second City, and Gilda Radner at the time, so working with Del, and Del was fascinating. I mean, Del scared me sometimes, but Del was fascinating. He loved comics. He loved science fiction. He loved comics. And he said at the time that comics was a great American art form that had yet to produce its first masterpiece. So it was very open to things. And Del wanted to play. And so with Del, we came up with they're all 8-page stories, usually no connection to any other story that had come before, with the exception of a character called the Dead Detective that we did a couple of continuing stories on. And we had a cycle of 4 artists in it, and it was unlike anything else that I've ever worked on. And there's a lot of people to this day that go, how did you get away with that? And for instance, Jeanette Kahn read the first story in the first issue. It was called RAB, which stood for retroactive abortion. And she decided she didn't need to read anything else from us, but she let us go on. We went on for 16 issues. And not because sales had said we had to quit, it's that I couldn't keep on coming up. Every 8 pages was a different world. In comics, you usually have things that you can keep on returning to, characters you can keep on returning to. Now with Wasteland. So I was creating a whole new world every 8 pages. And that got to be just too difficult.
I don't know that book. I'm going to have to go back and check it out now. That sounds incredibly interesting.
I'm checking to see if it's on. Oh, it is on the streaming, the app. It's on DC Universe Infinite.
Yes and no.
No?
No, I don't know if they still have it out there. And they stopped doing it because we were doing some of the stories were Del Close's autobiography, sort of. Del was never one to let facts get in the way of a good story. And he was telling one story about when he was with a group of actors traveling in a bus throughout some southern states when he was about in his early 20s. And and long story short, the N-word shows up at one point. I tried never to use it. It offends me, but it was appropriate there. And DC wanted to take it out. And I fought them on it. And finally, they just felt, well, we won't reprint it, or maybe any of the other stories. So there are some stories, I think, up on the board that you can take a look at some of them and get a good idea of what we did. There is a very dark humor in it, so they can be very entertaining, but they're designed to be unnerving.
Well, I'm all about it. That is going to go on my bedside table tonight so that I have very strange dreams. I'm looking forward to it. John, we have definitely used enough of your time. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us. I'm absolutely over the moon to have had the chance to talk with someone whose work I've loved and admired for so long.
Yes.
So thank you.
I've had a real good time.
I'm very glad. Where can folks find you online?
I'm on Facebook. Come on there, see what I'm saying, see who I'm poking fun at. Generally, the name is Trump, major target, and his cohorts. So, come by, take a look, see what I'm saying. Disagree if you dare. And
will do. All right. Thank you, John. And thank you, less important co-host, John.
Oh.
As per usual.
I'm always here for you, Jim.